Hey, hi everybody. This is Nicholas Frug here. I'm the co-founder of Hoverlay, and we're blessed today to have as our guest Jamal Thorne. And Jamal is not only a great, talented visual artist, but he's also a faculty member at Northeastern University, where he teaches immersive media. Uh, Jamal, thank you so much for being with us and giving us your time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Most definitely. Absolutely.
All right, so this session is really about trying to surface some nuggets of knowledge and wisdom that we can share with everybody or with others in the area of immersive media and specifically around teaching immersive media. It's a new field for everybody. So, I know from um, discussions with many of you on this call, and if you may be listening to the recording later, that there are a lot of findings being made, and the goal of this series of events that we're doing, these webinars, is to help share that knowledge. And so hopefully you can get out of that sessions little tidbits of ideas and tidbits of knowledge and things you can apply in your own classes or programs that hopefully will help you. So with that, Jamal, I'd like to start with my first question to you. And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started teaching immersive media.
Sure. I am, I want to say, a classically trained visual artist in studio art, painting, drawing, etc. I've got an undergrad in photographic media with graphic design, but I really do enjoy like my studio practice of working in layers to think about trauma, to think about the stories that come out of trauma. And that work, it's very, very physical. But when I started to think about immersive mediums like VR and AR, I started kind of envisioning like entire worlds rather than singular works of art. Entire worlds where I could kind of like make the rules, where I could kind of decide what that world looked like and even who the viewer might be when they inhabit that space. And I think that really kind of kept me in VR for quite some time. But then I started to think about augmented reality as a way to kind of change or maybe even examine our relationship to our physical surroundings in a way that really enriches our experience as human beings. And so I and a few other folks, colleagues at Northeastern University, we started putting together this immersive media minor. And the initial class for that minor is my class, which is Intro to Immersive Media, which includes 360 video, VR, mobile augmented reality, and mixed reality, kind of examining all of these different pillars that categorize immersive media.
That's great. And let me ask you this: so you're covering the full range, I would say, of the immersive technologies. Why would you say this is important for students today to learn about these technologies? What's your perspective and maybe Northeastern's perspective on this field?
Well, I think this is literally their language. I think that, in the world of Instagram and TikTok, where all of these filters, these augmented reality filters are starting to appear, I'm thinking back to, I want to say like 2018 when Google Pixel started doing AR stickers and things like that. This is literally the world in which they're growing. And I think that it's important that we teach them how to shape that world. And since it's their native language, I'm sure that they're going to be coming up with all kinds of exciting and crazy things that, we couldn't even fathom. And I think that's one of the strengths of this medium as a whole.
And do you see, since the Meta announcement, and there's been obviously more media interest, I would say, in this space, do you see a broader awareness around the potential of the media, the media in these technologies?
Yes, I want to say a few years ago that wasn't the case. I mean, with the introduction of Meta and the metaverse, I think most people are actually starting to ask really, really good questions. Well, what is this stuff? What does it do? Augmented reality? What are you even talking about? And I think all of these are really, really good questions that consumers need to be asking, both of the folks that are inventing and creating this technology and the folks that are creating the content. Because at a certain point, we have to start thinking about, well, how does this affect like us? How does this change us? What are we doing here? So I think that the coverage has really started to increase. I'm seeing a lot more, very basic rundowns of just the immersive media space, like on CNN, on Fox, and there's good coverage and quote unquote bad coverage. And I would say there's really, really good questions being asked about what this stuff is going to do and what it can do.
Yeah, and I think I suspect this will also change maybe the conversations in the classrooms, and the kind of trigger other topics around legal aspects and ethical aspects, and things are not just purely technology driven, but could be at another level of discussion from an academic perspective. Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
And so now if we zoom into your class, and you now having established this program, what is your approach to creating kind of an engaging class? If you were to describe your program, what are some of the things that you do that you think are working well for getting the students engaged and active?
I think and I think this is due to a lot of different, changes in technology. But I found that my students really respond to like instant gratification type things. If you think about it, it's not such a surprise. I needed to go to an encyclopedia if I wanted to know something, like when I was like very, very young. These days, they take out their phone and it's literally right there in the palm of their hand. And so I find that difference of approach to knowledge acquisition, it means that my project and my coursework, it needs to kind of have some pretty quick results. They need to be not very, very long projects, but projects that are rather immediate, in the sense that students can get their hands on a material on a medium, and they can see the effects of what they're building right then and there. They kind of get, this, I want to say they get this very, very fast understanding that, oh, I did something and something is changing. Oh, I've done something has happened. And a lot of my project work really does focus in on that premise, just making sure that they can see the effects of their actions in a really immediate way. I find that it, is really encouraging for them. They get excited. It's fun. And they're overall just very, very engaged in seeing the things that they're doing like really come to life.
What about things like teaming and groups, and how you organize your class, workflows, choosing topics? What are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, with choosing topics, I always challenge my students to look within themselves and to figure out what they want to say, what kind of story they want to tell. And that requires them to do like a little bit of prep work. It means that they have to really, think about the project, and then think about, their identities. Like, who are you and what do you have to say in relation to whatever topic this might be? I've got a site-specific augmented reality project in which, I require students to go walking through a certain space and to think about what that space means, both historically and their personal connections to that space. And then that then becomes the ammunition that they use to then build something. And once they build, whatever project that might be, it becomes this unique reflection of who they are as an individual, right? And again, that kind of goes back to just keeping them engaged. It's one thing to just create a project, but it's a totally different thing to create a project that is like emerging from a student's identity, because they're all searching for themselves. And they're all trying to make sense out of both themselves and the world around them. And so when you're able to kind of make those connections between those interests and the coursework, it really, really does help them like grab onto the project. In terms of teaming, putting together teams, I'd say that this space is rather unique in the sense that it's really interdisciplinary. It's a space that requires, coders. It requires 3D modelers. It requires folks that understand the business aspects and the cost of what it, might mean to create some of these projects. And so I try to create teams that are very interdisciplinary. It's like if somebody knows how to code, then I want them to be on a team with somebody who doesn't know anything about coding, but knows everything about 3D modeling, so that they're both kind of learning from one another. And they're also both like gaining, something and contributing something to the project. And I think that also is really important, making sure students don't feel like they're alone in this thing, like they're alone and they have to kind of figure out how to, deal with problems and issues that might arise like from their project work. It's much better to, know that there's a certain tool or skill set that I don't have, but my homeboy over here, he knows everything there is to know about digital sculpting in ZBrush. So, yo, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to sculpt this thing in ZBrush. I got somebody over here that's going to rig it up, and I'm going to write the code for making sure it's integrated into a website or integrated into this AR experience in a way that is functional. We'll work on the meaning as a group. We'll talk about the story that we want to tell together. But that's the kind of teaming that I try to, put together.
Which I think is a great, segue into the next question I want to ask you, which is about, some of the challenges you're seeing, in teaching this technology. It's growing so fast. It's many concepts, many technologies are different from what, we've all, used to from a technology perspective over the past 30 years. So it's not the same basis as the web. It's a different set of technology, gaming, and so on. So what are some of the challenges you've seen in kind of taking that complex environment and kind of applying this and making something that works in the classroom?
Well, I would say that the bigger challenges are that all this technology, it to some folks can seem like magic. Like there's no rhyme or reason to making it work. And once they start like getting into the things that make it work, like it can be really, really daunting. Like learning how to write C# code is not something that you do in one semester. Like that's not how that works. And then, learning how to like build 3D models and like rig 3D models so that they're animated. Like you can't just do that in one semester. And so kind of thinking about those aspects in relation to coursework and project work and how to kind of minimize those aspects so that, again, the students can really get fast results from what they're putting together, both by themselves and with their teams. Like it's ideal, because like all those things can seem like barriers to a student that really wants to express themselves in some kind of way. The other thing that I'd say is a bit of a challenge, and this is something that I'm just figuring out, I want to say in the past 3 weeks, is scoping their projects. There's just so much that can be done in this space. You can take a 3D model and put it next to a fully well-produced video in an augmented reality space. And at the moment, it might seem like a great idea because it's just cool stuff to do, and I'm not going to lie, it's definitely cool stuff to do. Like putting all of these different kinds of media in one space, it's exciting. But the issue is that it can become noise so easily if you don't teach these kids, these young folks, these creators, how to emphasize certain aspects of the experience. Like maybe the video plays for 2 minutes and then it disappears and then a 3D model appears, as opposed to both happening at the same time. Maybe spatialized audio is an aspect of their project. And then as they move closer to a certain space that is emitting a certain sound, maybe they're called to look at an image rather than a video, so that they don't have to try to deal with moving images in conjunction with totally opposite sounds. And these are the kinds of things that really help, just help students make sense out of this medium. I kind of liken it to hierarchy to some degree. What things do you want to be louder? What things do you want to be softer? And when should that be happening? But most importantly, why? Why are you doing all these things? when you kind of get into that space of, well, why does it make sense for this video to play and for this 3D model to kind of not be present, we start to get into this like idea of like, all right, this is more important for the viewer to be paying attention to at the moment. I want them to focus on this video because there is an important bit of information that is like being, conveyed through that video. It'll give them the next steps. It'll give them some information about, the narrative, so on and so forth. And I want them to pay attention to it. So you gotta have to figure out where to play things up and where to play things down. Plus, on top of that, it's easy to let a lot of the stuff get away from you. All of these ideas, again, are so cool that you might want to do all of them at the same time. And really, it's a better idea to kind of curate, pull back, and figure out what to do that's in service to the overall concept of the project, rather than just do all the things that are there simply because they're there. I mean, it can get daunting. You can get lost out there with all that stuff. So I try to, get them to scope, their projects a little bit better. Think about audience, think about media, and think about location.
Right. These are great points, and I think as the technology becomes easier, using, tools like Hoverlay Spaces or others, but as you get into now, you remove some barriers to constructing content. Now you start to have a new level of questions that arise that are, okay, well, if I can do it, should I do it, and why? And I think this is great to hear that we're now getting into the interesting questions about all this.
Yeah.
If you're listening, feel free to type some question. I see a couple of questions in the chat. We're going to open it up for questions in a few minutes, but just to kind of wrap up, and I think you gave some great advice. I'm sure everybody got some interesting tidbits from what you just said. Are there other things that you would recommend others do to have successful programs, immersive media programs? What are some of the thoughts, things you haven't touched on yet that you may want to leave with the audience here?
Well, I would say you want to consider the strengths of the medium and each like pillar of the medium. Like when I think about augmented reality, and Nicholas, we've talked about this before, but one of the unique aspects of AR, especially mobile AR, is that it really changes the way we relate to our immediate surroundings by augmenting them with, information, with videos, with 3D models, etc. And I think that's one of the clear separations between AR and VR. But I also think that's what makes AR, mobile AR, so exciting, is because we're dealing with our immediate reality and we're enhancing it either with narrative or with information of some kind. I think one of the things that is really exciting about just artwork in general, and artists in general, is that there's always a story behind their work. Like there's a story behind the existence of the work, and it's uniquely theirs. And so in the presence of that artwork, if I'm able to speak to the artist and talk to them about that story, then that work has much more meaning to me all of a sudden. The same is true with anything else that we encounter in everyday life. If we understand the story and the work that goes into creating something, that goes into any object that we're working with, then our relationship to that object is now enriched in a very different kind of way. Like we feel connected to it, like to some degree emotionally. And I think to kind of like give some props to one of my colleagues, David Temes, I think it really does emphasize the fact that a lot of our lives really do revolve around narrative. And we kind of rely on narrative to help us make meaning out of experiences. And so that's one thing that I think everybody should emphasize when it comes to augmented reality in particular. I think the other thing that should be emphasized here is that it's a fun medium. Like it's fun to do this stuff. And I try to remind my students of that very fact. Have fun. Just have a good time. We'll get to curation later. We'll get to, the why of things later. We'll talk about all that. But for the moment, it's good to really just look at this stuff as a way to have a good time. and then we'll pull meaning out of it, because that's what we always do, literally.
You're right. I think the potential for triggering emotions with that medium, compared to the web, I think is very is there, and it's, I think, one thing that I think students should embrace and understand. How do you trigger those emotions, and how do you capture attention and things like that. I think it has that potential, unlike other form of technology out there. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about it. Like, it's a magical thing to, suddenly see a video in midair, like when you hold your phone up to a couch or something like that.
mm,
It's a magical thing that like excites us, and it
yeah.
really does connect us to our physical reality in a different way, I think. I think the last thing I'd say is I always try to challenge my students to like include themselves in their work so that it feels like it's theirs, so it feels like it belongs to them. And I challenge them to look within, and find the important stories that they want to tell, the important aspects that they've experienced in their lives, and figure out how to weave them into their work. Because like at that point it's not just work anymore. At that point I think it's something very, very different. And I don't really know what to call it, but it's certainly not work once you see a student really putting themselves into what they're doing.
hmm That's a very good point. With that, Jamal, I first of all want to thank you. This was really interesting, and I just want to open it up for questions. I have a button here, ask all to unmute. So I'm going to click that, and if anybody wants to jump in, just unmute yourself and go ahead. Hey, Ben.
Hi.
I'm down in Arizona. I really enjoyed your thoughts. Thank you very much. And Nicholas, thanks for setting this up. I do a couple things down at Arizona State. I'm a faculty in the intermediate area, which has a graduate program and all the way down to freshmen. But then I also head up our first year freshman experience. And the threshold for getting into this stuff has really come down. I mean, Hoverlay is amazing. I mean, and it doesn't seem to sacrifice the sophistication at all, at least in my kind of limited understanding of the technology. But I'm in the process of designing a new course called Expanded Arts, and at the freshman level, 100 level. And I'd love to introduce some of these technologies. And it would only be like a module, within a whole bunch of stuff we have to cover. But is that reasonable, or am I just begging to fail by trying to introduce some of this at the freshman level?
No, I think it's more than reasonable. In my intro class, it's modular. And our experience with Hoverlay is, I want to say, a 4-week long module that, sees like a site-specific augmented reality project through to the end. Now, granted, like what I do is very much about the site. So I send them to a site. I say, hey, you got to walk around the site and figure out what needs to be put here, what needs to be said here, what isn't here, and what needs to be told to augment that space. But again, just because of how streamlined things are with the platform, it really is like a focus on content rather than a focus on, wow, how are we going to even get this off the ground? So I'm able to kind of put together some very, very like basic, straightforward examples of how to use this platform. And once they see that, their minds just go. They're like, literally, I've heard students audibly say, you mean it's that easy? And it's like, yeah, it actually is that easy. And because it's kind of like that, like I think it's a totally viable course of action to, take a module and say, all right, what can you guys do with this platform? Do you want to augment one of your paintings? Do you want to augment the space? Do you want to augment like some other kind of object? Do you want to, turn a space into your personal theater, like that people can enjoy when they hold their phone up to a certain area? Like getting them active in that way, I think is a worthwhile venture for sure.
Great, thank you. Very, very helpful.
Thanks, Dan. Any other question I see in the chat?
Oh, I do have a question. So thank you so much, Jamal. That was beautifully spoken and really interested. I'm going to email you and try to connect with you. I teach at Sheridan in Toronto. I have a City of Toronto Artworks grant, and I'm recreating history, 6 locales of the history on the Toronto Islands.
Mhm.
So the big question for me, and it sounds technical, but it actually relates to content, is the depth of compression. So prior to knowing that Hoverlay does a lot of compression, we were working with compression. So ideally that people would not have to sign into anything, download it and see the locale. So I'm just wondering if, Nicholas, I've been speaking to you by email, but I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind addressing that, please.
So sorry, go ahead.
And just to clarify, you're talking about compression of content, right?
Yes, because our concern is that if they do it off the site, is that people might be, in Canada, we have very, very high charges for very little connectivity, unlike the rest of the world. We're in a terrible, it's an ongoing joke, right? So people will be aware of how much they're downloading. And I'm just wondering, because it's something that I'm concerned about, if you could address that, please, what the compression factors are within Hoverlay. And also we're trying to design for a 30-second experience, which is something that we know if people are on their bicycles, they're walking, how much time will they stay at each locale? So these are the parameters of concerns that I have.
Yeah, so maybe I can give you the technical side of this. So we're also very focused on that particular topic. What we're trying to optimize for is the download time. So trying to make sure that what we serve on the phone, just like a website, we serve content, it's Hoverlay works a little bit like a website works, that these assets are sized up so that they render efficiently, but also they download efficiently. So we automatically optimize images to 1K. So if you put, in 1K meaning 1000 by whatever the aspect ratio is, so that they're relatively small in size. There's a lot of things you can do to optimize that, the content yourself as well. For instance, just using JPEG instead of PNG. So, that's one thing that's not very obvious to everybody is that JPEG is a compressed format when PNG is not compressed or very little compression. But JPEG does not support transparency, so you cannot do cutouts and things like that. So if you're just doing rectangular images, then JPEG is perfect because you can have a 10x factor in terms of file sizes. For 3D models, we actually introduced in Spaces a system that takes the GLB files and unpacks those files, reduces also the textures to something that's mobile friendly, and then repackages the 3D model. So you can go from a model that could be, 20 megabytes to something that's 2 megabytes, just by the fact that it goes through the upload process. Again, these are things you can do by hand, but they're just tedious. And the thing that we recommend is that every space you create is below 20 meg in size, especially if you're outside, and if you have even more concern, you might want to target less, maybe 10 meg, 5 meg. But in every space, if you scroll down in Spaces, it's going to give you an assessment of the size. So you have also some download times estimates based on different network conditions and the size. So it's a good way to go and figure out, okay, where am I within my budget of content here? Sorry, that was a long answer, and happy to send you more by email or on Slack on this.
If I might add to that, my colleague and I, because you bring up a really, really important question, that it was something that I had to consider when I first started on this class. My colleague and very good friend, Sophia Dara, and I were talking about accessibility and, the price of a cell phone being like still a pretty insurmountable barrier. But part of that discussion was also like download charges, like through the use of data. And it's like, how do we broaden these experiences to the folks that actually do like monitor their like data usage? And the way I kind of frame like my project work is I take that and I introduce it as like a thing that the students have to solve for, because it's actually very, very important. It's something that I think is, again, very unique to mobile augmented reality, the fact that we want to make these experiences widely shareable. Like, one of the barriers for immersive media in general is the fact that it can be really, really expensive to get into it and have one of these experiences. So in framing the project work as like, all right, we have to make sure and take into account the users, our audience. What are they worried about? What do they care about? They care about data usage. So therefore, that changes what kind of content that you can like really introduce through this platform. And I think the good news is that it forces the students to think. They have to. And I really do appreciate like that part of the problem, like the design problem as well, is forcing them to really think about like their audience and what their needs are. But that's a really good question.
It's a great point. And I think, that gets me to think we may want to put some specific content just to help, people who use at least Hoverlay spaces to think about, those things and in their totality. Because I think, like you said, people are used to that kind of experiences on a hardware, on a high-end PC or in a gaming platform, a gaming console. And now you're on the phone and you're trying to use the same technology, but you have, download constraints, you have rendering constraints. So it's great points. Something we could definitely do more in educating people about this.
And the good news can do it, yeah.
Yes, thanks so much. There was this wonderful survey. They said that how many seconds does it take for people to watch a classical painting in an established museum. And so I have to ask the same questions about locales. And the other point that you made earlier as well, if there's any attribute I would give to Hoverlay, is time-based triggers. So this is what you see first, this is second, this is third. So if I want to be 50 seconds, this is what I see, 30, 45, and that would be one of the greatest attributes to the application. So thank you.
Yeah, and we're working on a whole new capability around what we call storylines, which is going to be time-based, and the ability to create sequence of things that could load up over time. So that's going to be, it's very exciting. It's not ready yet, but it's going to be ready soon. And I'm sure, we'll make sure everybody is aware when it's ready for, playing around with it. We'll love to get feedback. So feel free to reach out if you want to access as well. All right. Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Micah here from Smash. Just getting some insight basically about students who are in the 9th grade and they're having their first contact with Hoverlay. Any tips around that, Jamal, for students who probably have a shared experience like you? We do try to immerse them in solving problems in their own community, but do you have any specific tips for anything around high school students who are their first time using Hoverlay?
Yeah, I actually taught high school for a year and a half, and I taught like an 8th period art class. It was a good time. So I know the population you're working with. They got energy. They got a lot of energy. They're excited, and you just want to help them point that energy in a certain direction. Let me tell you, in my experience with 9th graders, if you do something or show them something that they've kind of never seen before, like it pauses them, like it stops them dead in their tracks. They're like, oh, that was cool. And I know, like, to us adults, like, it may seem rather trite to some degree, but to them, it's like magic. It's like, oh, snap. You mean you made that by crushing a can and then painting the blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I did. And once they kind of grabbed on to that, then they want to know. They're like, all right, how do I do it? Like, tell me how to do it, like, so I can do it. And you got them. They're focused. So I would say, if it were me, I would take something as simple as just a photograph that they can all recognize. Call it Cardi B. That's what all the kids are listening to nowadays. All right. I love Cardi B too. But I would take, an image, something very, very basic, whether, a short video or a still image, maybe a 3D model, or even if it were like spatialized audio. And if nothing else, you give them the opportunity to take out their phones in class. They're going to love it. So these kinds of things are strategies that I would employ when engaging with like ninth graders, 10th graders, because once you give them like just that moment, they're really going to grab onto it. And it could be a moment of them seeing something that they've never seen before. And it could also be a moment of them getting the privilege to do something that they are normally like not allowed to do, like take their phones out in class. I would combine those two and say, all right, everybody take out your phone, take a picture of this QR code and see and watch what happens. Just watch what happens. And little by little, one person at a time, one young person at a time, they're going to be like, oh, well, it's floating. It's just there. Like, how did you do that? And like, I got you. Here's how I did it. And that's when you yank up that website, pull up the platform, show them the interface. And then the next thing you're going to hear, that's it. Like, just put it there. Like, okay. And then you're going to get them into the question space of like, well, all right, now that you know it can be done, what do you want to put there? What needs to be put there? That's the way I would do it.
Oh, thank you so much. And you're so right. They are, they're native to this. They've been on all these sites and all of TikTok and everything else. And I think they are quite curious to know, how do they do that on the back end of it? Mm-hmm. So thanks so much for that input.
For sure.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions?
So I will also from Smash, actually at Smash Northeastern. So you're right in my backyard. And so we'll be running this program, this summer. And one of the things that I wanted to explore with is like how to talk about, and I might have missed you talking about this already, but how to talk about like sort of issues of like race and stuff and thinking about that within a place. And so I know like part of the, like at least exhibits that I've seen on Hoverlay have done things like memorials and stuff like that. And I'm curious about like how that's, so I guess maybe two-part question, how that's helped kind of engage students in the process, and maybe what are some of the things that have come up that maybe you weren't anticipating or that turned out to be rather charged, and just things that we want to be aware of.
I'll tell you what I wasn't anticipating. I wasn't anticipating how savvy and engaged these young folks are when it comes to these topics. They are uniquely tuned into them in a way that I don't think I was when I was their age, honestly. And I think that really surprised me. And it surprised me not just because they were savvy, but they wanted to talk about it. All of them wanted to talk about it. And I am always impressed. What seems so taboo, like what seems taboo to grown-up and adults right now, these young folks are actually interested in having a conversation about. It's remarkable. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. And it kind of makes me second guess a lot of like earlier moments in projects where I thought to myself, like, is this a good idea to like point to this like unique aspect of this city's history? Like, what does that bring up? Is it going to be a charged moment? Is it going to be intense? Am I triggering somebody? But I think you might be surprised at how strong these young people are and how interested they are in really knowing the world that they're inheriting as we speak. I think that that's going to be a surprise for one. The other thing that I'd say is I would encourage them to think about, not just the history of a place or a location, but also, think about like their personal relationship to that location. Like that's a thing, it's interesting to me how uncomfortable, I can feel in a place walking, like, in the commons sometimes, just because I'm worried about the way people are looking at me. And that actually has not so much to do with the history of that location, but more about what's happening with me, with other people, the social dynamics at that exact moment. So I think with those kind of projects, you've got to look at the history, but also look at what's happening right now, like at that exact moment.
Really appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Jamal, and thank you to everybody who joined. This was, I think, a very interesting discussion. I've learned a few things myself, and so that's, I'm sure that everybody got something out of this, and I hope we can do this again. Feel free to reach out if this was helpful. We could organize this on a ongoing basis and invite different speakers to share their thoughts and start to build a community around people that are teaching immersive media. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye. Yes.
I put my email address in the chat for everybody, just in case. If you have any more questions, I love answering questions. I love talking.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamal. Thanks, everybody.